Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Durhodge. Thanks for tuning in again today with to Authentic Living with Roxanne. I have a special, I would say, a friend now, Mike Pagan, who I met in Ireland. Goodness, it's almost a year now
Yeah, now.
at the Global Speakers annual event, which was I think one of the best events I'd ever been to. And we were able to kind of chat a bit, really briefly, but recognize that we talk about health and mental wealth, like Mike will talk about. And it was just an area that we both had in common. So we've been chatting ever since, and we have some colleagues that meet. And so I'll tell you a little bit about Mike and a little bit about what we're going to chat about today. So his topic is building mental wealth. And so looking at mental wealth from a perspective of what are the things that you bring with you and what do you need to gain that kind of bolstering to be optimally functioning. He is a coach. He has written 4 books. He's a keynote speaker, and he starts his coaching sessions with a blank page, which I love that perspective when I read that in your bio, Mike. So Mike, thanks so much for joining us today.
No, pleasure to be here. It's good to be on the other side of this interview environment where it's kind of right now over to you. You talk. Scary.
And I've been enjoying interviewing some of our colleagues that I've met since I've met you. So it's been quite fascinating to get different perspectives and just different people coming forward. So let's talk a little bit about what got you in dealing with mental health. Like what was kind of your path that made you pick that as a topic to focus on?
It was an interesting setup because I had the privilege of working with professional sportsmen and women transitioning to their life after their career in sport. And a lot of these individuals, incredible athletes, incredible in everything they did. They're striving for performance and perfection and everything else. But all of them had this one thing in common, and that was the guillotine moment that came down at the end of their careers, whether that be through loss of form, loss of function, being dropped, whatever it happened to be. And that at that point, there were 35 people potentially in their support network, keeping them on the pitch, in the pool, or on the track yesterday. And none of them are fit for purpose for the way forward now because they're not needed. And these guys then hit this massive brick wall of isolation and loss and direction. And what I started to understand and research was the fact that actually that transition space happens for all of us. Mm-hmm. And there are many, many times where we feel isolated at different points, be that as the chief exec of a multi-million-dollar business or as a solopreneur selling products that you've created in your garage and everything in between. And it was just that process of understanding that we need to invest in ourselves, in our strength of our mind, and the strength of our well-being, and our body and our head and everything else around that. So mental wealth became the sort of the yin to the yang of mental health, because it's proactively investing and supporting and getting the right people around you, rather than the other side where we suddenly find ourselves isolated with a team or support that are not fit for purpose and can then take us down a negative path into a negative spiral of poor mental health. So hence it becomes the yin to the yang.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the West, we often wait till something's broken to address it. And a lot of Eastern philosophies will talk about trying to find that connection or that solitude, or kind of a combination of both. But in the corporate world here, and I'm sure as likewise in Europe, you might know someone is potentially, let's say they've gone through something. Like you're talking about the sportsmen, they were going through transitions. So they had to deal with a lot of loss. They had to do with the fact that maybe they didn't get the accolades anymore of being on the pitch or doing wherever they were being. And they were very, very structured in that, and very ultimately very good at what they do. But then they go through that loss and potentially supports that they perceive that would be good for them, I would assume then eventually becomes, well, it's not working so well for me now. And then they have to adjust. So I think a lot of times in companies here, we're waiting for until somebody comes forward to get help versus kind of proactively thinking, what might that person need? Is that what you saw a lot with the
Yeah,
sports people?
it's that element of structured discipline, focus, chunk. You know what you've got to do. You talk to many sports people and they say, I knew what I was going to eat, when I was going to eat, and how I was going to eat for 20 years. And then suddenly that was gone. But then look at the transition space where you look at a student moving from schools to colleges, from colleges into their first job, to a graduate program, to buying their first property, and so on. These transitions that are constantly going on, where if we haven't got good people around us, proactive people holding us accountable, asking better questions than we can of ourselves, then we make more mistakes. And as we make more mistakes, then that can have a negative effect on our well-being and how we go forward. And I know, for a specific example, I've made my greatest errors in business, and I've been running my own business for over 20 years now, when I just haven't taken that independent piece of advice from somebody that I've empowered I've given permission to turn around and say, Mike, that's not such a good idea. Or sort of, have you considered it this way around? And when we don't have people in our group around it, I mean, call it an inner sanctum. I call it a mental wealth team. It's whatever language, what that core of people who ask better questions of you than we do of ourselves, or they're questions that we are too scared to ask ourselves because we know what the answer will be, so we want to avoid it.
Or maybe we ask people certain questions because we know how they're going to answer it, because that keeps us in our comfort zone sometimes as well.
Yes, yeah, it just reinforces that it's an echo chamber, like the algorithms on social media. Yes, of course it's right because 47 other people have said it, but that's the algorithm just feeding me the same stuff. And so some of the time we need that independent, that extra set of lenses on it that are going to turn around and say, nah, that's not right for you. But that only happens when we empower people and give people permission when they're close enough.
So this brings a concept of vulnerability. Like, I mean, and we know that's the core thing. A lot of us, maybe early on learned implicitly or explicitly, well, you don't share too much kind of outside of the family, or you're only sharing enough so that, we don't look bad. Or so a lot of people, I would say, and in kind of my work as a psychologist, is a lot of people kind of go, I remember a family saying they had a motto that was like, nothing breaks us.
Nice.
Meaning that they have this, regardless, you could be losing limbs and lots of different things, but you never go outside of the family to share. So when you kind of think about people that you work with, Mike, how do they kind of look at connection? Like if they're coming from a space of, well, we'd already, that means I'm weak. If I need you, I'm weak, right? Like, I mean, I've gone through a separation and different things, raised my son on my own. And I remember when I was going through that, and I was always the one, because maybe potentially the role I played, I was the one that cared for others. And what happened is, my friends even said to me, they waited to see what I would do. Just to see if I could actually come to them, because they knew I needed it. And of course I was like, okay, where are you? Where are my troops? I need everybody.
Because I'm spending my whole time giving. Yeah, you're giving, fixing, and supporting everybody else, but not looking after number one. And it's right. What I heard there was that the whole thing of vulnerability, and this is isolation in the boardroom. It's a classic example. Whether you're a C-suite executive or a senior management, whatever it is, you can't tell the stakeholders above you don't know the answer. You're not going to share with your co-directors or colleagues that you're not sure what to do next, because that might get used against you at a future date when it comes to promotions. Your husband or wife hasn't got a clue what you do anyway, but they've got your back. Your friends at the school gate, at the sports club, in the other environment that you go to outside of work will always say, go for it, Mike, because you always land on your feet, because that's what you want them to say, and that's how. And you certainly can't share with an employee or a direct line that you don't know which way to go forward. And so this creates this isolation within the boardroom, within the C-suite, within work. And it doesn't matter the size of the organization. There could be 50 employees, there could be 50,000 employees. That isolation piece plays out across the board. And therefore vulnerability, oh, well, I can't do that. The sports people can't show there's any vulnerability. And part of one of the benefits, I believe, of what's come out of the years of COVID is the sort of the evolution, the evolving of this is no longer soft, fluffy stuff that we need to ignore or can ignore. We need to be investing proactively. The next generations, Gen Z and millennials, will not work for organizations that don't care.
Right.
Leadership across the Western world still has some very, very unique, mature people, as in years, that is not fit for purpose for the way forward. They will move on over the next few years.
Right.
And then hopefully, he says, clutching, they'll be replaced by more dynamic, more people that are involved that will work and understand and get with it. But there's an extra element that we do really need to be aware of here, and this is unintentional isolation. And that comes from the hybrid working environment. So 3 and 2, 2 and 3 days a week working from home. And if you happen to be one of those 20-somethings, 30-somethings that are working from your parents' spare bedroom with a fluffy slippers on, Netflix on the second screen over here, cat on the bed next to you, mum popping in every 40 minutes with a cup of tea to make sure you're okay. That's not a professional mindset. That's not an environment where you're going to learn via osmosis from the colleagues around you. That's where you're going to, if it's not working, going to go down a negative spiral. So whilst the hybrid working is here to stay, and there's certain industries where clearly it can't work. I was at the dentist this morning. Clearly that can't work in a hybrid world. Yeah, just send your teeth in. But there's elements where the hybrid won't go. But we really need to be aware of exactly what we're doing here to sort of prevent people being cut off, cut adrift, or not seeing what's happening, and then them not being comfortable or strong enough in that environment to say, I need some help, but it's not because I'm weak. I just need better help.
Right. And I think, to your point, like when I was in corporate, I remember I was just starting, I was in my 20s, so I was like, had an assistant. So I thought, well, I'm going to share I manage a portfolio of companies. And, at that point, and this is how siloed you really were, right? So here I was, and I would get paid commissions on the profitabilities of the account. I've got an executive assistant, so I'm running the numbers, and I'm kind of saying to her, I want you to double check the math, right? Just to make sure I'm on, and and I got reprimanded by my superiors because I was being so transparent with my assistant about the commissions that were payable. And I'm like, okay, so you give me an assistant, and this is, obviously administrative work. It's checking, it's math checking. And I'm using her because I shouldn't be sitting there trying to, do the arithmetic that may take me longer. She could do it quicker. And I got told that I needed to keep that private because, in fact, the assistant should know the level of pay that we would get on profitable accounts. And I'm like, and I didn't think I was stepping into anything, but I was so it's interesting, right? Because you're right.
That trust and empowerment of staff. If you don't trust the staff, how can you possibly expect them to be fully committed, fully engaged, fully working? That conversation, that's so sad, but that's how it was a few years ago, and still is in certain places.
Absolutely. So two things, Mike, that I think is interesting. I think you're right. As we're transitioning out, we're going to have, the newer generations keeping the older, let's use the older guard accountable. So there's going to be a bit of friction till we find that right combination. But in the interim, we have hybrid. We have people that are, going to jump ship quickly if they realize that they're working for companies that are misaligned. And in the interim, you know, your human capital, we know, is your biggest asset. So what is it that companies, aware companies, are doing around mental health that you're working with versus the
Well,
ones
one
that
of
are
the
just
things
signed up? Yeah.
one of the things I love talking about is we people have gotten used to this terminology of corporate social responsibility, CSR. What are we doing to give back? What are we doing to? Well, I'm referring to HSR, human social responsibility, because it's that framework, it's that format of, okay, what are we doing to proactively invest and support our staff? What are we doing to proactively invest in and work with it? And one of the key areas, I believe, is, and we shouldn't need permission to do this. It's a key point, but we do personally. And that is permission to make ourselves number one.
Mm-hmm.
So when we put ourselves as number one in our world, that means being positively selfish. Because the wonderful language you've got is selfish is one of those things when we're children. Don't be selfish, share your toys. Yeah, so selfish is a bad word. We're not allowed to do that. But actually, in my family, I've always jokingly been number 6. Because there's my wife, 3 children, and a dog, and they're all above me. Yeah, and last Christmas we had 8 puppies, so I was actually number 14. but joking aside, that is the reality. When we put ourselves number one, then we are able to be fit for purpose for when other people need to draw on our energy. There's enough stories from every religion out there about how we have to fill our cup first, otherwise we can't help others. But we don't do it naturally. We spend the whole time looking and helping and fixing. And when we start looking through the minds of self-care, of getting coaches support, getting professional networks around us and putting peer support groups, mastermind groups together, then that changes the game. And self-care comes in so many different ways, from mindfulness and meditation to activities to just taking time out and pressing that pause button. And we're rubbish at pressing pause. But we need to press pause so that we are able to recharge, reboot, recondition. It doesn't work without it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even in getting a bit older, like today, I know I have a 12-hour day. So what I did is I went to hot yoga at 7:30, right? Because I know that you know what I mean? And when you're younger, you're doing it, but you can be a bit more haphazard, I would even say. But as you're starting to get older, you're like, geez, if I keep up this, by Friday, I'm going to be, flat out, just kind of needing to veg. So I think it's interesting, right? Like, you're so right. We do. And I've done it horribly, where I've like kind of looked at the end of the week going, what happened? Right. And now I'm kind of like, okay, well, I need to do things differently. And I think you're right. It's that word selfish. It has such a negative connotation, but in really what you're saying to people is put yourself first, so you have something in your cup to be able to help others.
Yeah, definitely.
And in my new book, I talk a lot about that with ROR. I talk about the leader knowing him or herself.
Get those
right?
relationships returning. Definitely.
Yeah, like how do you know, what do you like when you're stressed? How do you communicate? What's your decision making like? What kind of micro breaks do you take through the day? And if you don't, what do you like? And if you do, what do you do differently, so that they could become more connected to themselves, to look at, I'm not so good at this, and I'm not so good, but I'm pretty good at this and this, but I have to work on this. Because if they bring their best versions of themselves to work, the concentric circles that get connected to the people around them, the benefit is that you're able to see what Mike's doing. You're able to, even if you're on a screen, you're able to kind of intuit a little bit better what's going on and be able to connect, versus kind of, you're in that 747 or 30,000 feet, and you're not dipping down just to see. Because we know a lot of leaders, they have that type of personality that they can, withstand a lot. And they sometimes are remiss in kind of thinking, okay, what am I doing that might be affecting people, until things are a little bit too late. We know that with mental health. with some
A
of the
classic one
team.
I share with you. You see the 4 pictures up above and around my head at the moment.
Yes.
When I go to conferences, I will always, where possible, it's a rule of thumb rather than rule of life, but take an extra day afterwards to decompress. Because if you when you're at conferences, you're at events, they're very intense. They're talking to lots of people, performing main stage, delivering your event, having the whole setup. So the pictures here are just random ones whilst I'm out walking. A couple of them were from Vancouver. The happiness statues, the laughter statues, they're brilliant. Other ones were from ROR in Poland. And they're just these little dwarfs that are sort of placed all around the city. There's 300 of them. There's a wonderful story attached to it and everything else. But just from that sort of feel good, decompress and look after number one. It's a great way so that when I return home to my family, then I am in a different space because I'm ready to be the family Mike rather than the working Mike. And then when you go back into work the next day, you are then in the mindset and the space, rather than turning up with your eyes hanging down here, bloodshot and fatigued and everything going wrong. And that makes such a difference for me. But it's a simple one. And it does involve me being proactively giving myself permission to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's necessary for looking after our self-care so that we're fit for purpose.
And I absolutely, and this is the stuff that I, obviously when I coach or train, I'm talking about those things consistently. How are you taking responsibility for your mental well-being so that you can, and if you're not having a good week or something's going on in your life, to be able to be vulnerable enough to share, not like everything, but at least for people to understand that you're going through some stuff, and maybe for them to have grace, just like you would expect the other way around. So I think that whole element of shoulder to shoulder leading, where if you do step into it, and we, leaders do often, and I was a leader in many positions when I did, but to go back to the person and say, I realized I was a little bit abrupt there, or maybe I was a little bit too direct and kind of down the middle versus kind of slowing, and I didn't feel so good for me. I'm so sorry about that. It's been one of those weeks or whatever. So to be able to intuit what you are feeling, and and then doing something about it, and then that other person thinks, wow, Mike was able to do that. It's so nice to know that he's just like me, right? And when you get people feeling like that, what do they want? The relatability. We all want to, I think, for the most part, do a good job, because it's kind of where we spend most of our time. So I think that that kindness from leadership is an element that I talk a fair amount about, right?
We always try to portray ourselves as invincible, having all the answers and everything else like that. But perfect Peter has no friends because nobody can relate to him.
Right.
So as a leader, if you're portraying this badge of perfection and everything is squeaky and so on, then you can become aloof, you can become unapproachable, you can become, well, they've got it all. So what can I? So I'm not going to go to them with my problems because they won't have time for it. And so, as you say, it's that sense of humanity, just sharing that scope. So, there's a reason. Yeah, I can talk to you.
So tell me, if there's leadership teams or there's leaders listening, or someone even frontline, and they're thinking, oh, we are so isolated. So let's start at the top and say, well, what kind of guidance would you give a leader that's thinking, I think we're in a pretty disconnected environment? What are some of the things, maybe 3 steps that they could potentially, think about implementing, or some things for them to consider about, kind of, you're not going to connect tomorrow, but to kind of get towards the element of connection with your staff?
Okay. The first step there is understanding who's in that support network and if the support networks actually exist. And there's a simple technique I will use where people subjectively score their network as to whether or not they are actually close or part of their inner sanctum, or they're just a name in a database. Yeah, it's a WhatsApp number. That's all it is. They're not close. So it's understanding how isolated that is, because certain people will suddenly realize, actually, there's nobody in my inner sanctum that I'm happy to be open, honest, vulnerable, and mentally naked with. And that therein lies the key part of it, because if we're like that, then there's people that we truly trust. And some of those are in our friendship networks, but others are those in our professional networks. So it's knowing that. The next step is understanding, what are people doing for themselves in the world of self-care? Have we got a culture? Have we got an environment where people feel good about doing other things? Or is it very much work to rule? And a classic example of that, my daughter, a millennial working in a corporate organization as a student, so on her year placement as a student, and the computer system, you have to be working the whole time. If after 15 minutes the mouse hasn't moved, it automatically logs you off, which therefore the company then thinks that this person isn't working. She's a 22-year-old young lady. That's the work environment she's got, and she's in her student house because it's hybrid working. She's a robotics and mechanical engineering student. So she designed a robot to move her mouse every 12 minutes. So it's a sad story, but it's a funny story.
But it's brilliant as well.
And it's kind of, but hold on a second, that's wrong. And whilst, so that's an extreme version of where organizations in the hybrid world are trying to keep control and not empower. And so from a leadership perspective, leaders listening to this and understanding, hold on a second, we do stupid stuff like that. We do stuff like that really doesn't embrace a culture of trust, empowerment, and love. We need to focus on that one. And then the final area I'd say is just this simple process of pick up the phone. If as a leader, as a human being, whatever else, if your gut feel says, I haven't spoken to Roxanne for a few weeks, there's something, just a trigger, do not text them, do not tweet them, do not WhatsApp message them, whatever else. Pick up the phone. If you live close enough geographically, go and visit them, because you do not know what is going on inside somebody else's world. And if there's just that inkling of something, you get that thing on social media that goes around, I'd rather hear from you at 3 o'clock in the morning than talk about you at your funeral.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, because, it's so much, the phone now it's the ultimate barrier that people use, right? Not connect. And, just a simple, like this in my time, was always about the telephone, right? Like, I mean, and better yet, it's just kind of running, seeing someone, because I when I met you in person, and now I feel like obviously I know you, I can see you on screen. See, if I had met you on screen and hadn't met you in person, I feel differently. So I love, and I think there's nothing that replaces that ability to be able to connect with someone, to be able to kind of, see other than just a third of who you are, just to be able to kind of get to know the person. So I think sometimes it's just going back to those basic things. So definitely know your level of connection. And if you're not so good at it, why aren't you connected? Why aren't certain people on your team? And that probably, I would think, would be kind of telling for you as well. What areas do you need to work on? So, like, for people that are listening and they might want to connect with you, learn about your books or coaching or speaking, where can they get a hold of you?
Simplest way is either through mikepagan.com. There's not many Pagan surnames out there. It's not because I'm anti-religious, it just is my surname. So come through on that, or via LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that's a space where I can always have conversations and see what's going on. If there's ways of collaborating, supporting, and helping, that's always part of it. And the one other one on a monthly, we said we'd mentioned this, on a monthly basis, I do a mental wealth think tank, which it's a non-sales environment. Anybody on there is banned from any selling. It's just conversations in a safe space about things that are current in the well-being world, in the mental wealth world. What are people doing to proactively look after themselves better? If people have got challenges or issues within their work, it's a safe space. Nothing's recorded, nothing goes anywhere. And that's always the first Friday of the month. So if you're pinging through or talking to me, that might be of interest to some of those listening.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to try to jump in on that at one point. So, Mike, thanks so much. So, I'm going to think, this is my challenge to myself. I'm going to think about my supports and see what area I might be lacking in, and see if I can spend some time in quiet to reflect on, if there was a person that I wanted to join my mental health team, where might I find them? Like
Yeah.
how might I approach them? So I challenge you to do the same. Try to think, who's in your life, what do they do for you, and if there's sometimes an area where you find you're always struggling to get an answer from a different angle, that potentially might show you where a gap exists. So go out and try that.
Roxanne, just on there, I wouldn't advocate dumping friendships that you don't think are there. Just look at who's the 2.0, who's the next version up that's going to help you going forward, because that friend can still be a friend. This isn't about brutal cutting people off. It's about what is fit for purpose for your way forward. And if you need the next version up, let's have an upgrade.
2.0 version, you may have evolved past that person. Doesn't mean that they may not be a friend again, but a good point, Mike. Thanks for sharing that. So for everyone, thanks for hanging out with Mike and I. What I would suggest is if you wanted to know about your relationships, that's the area that I speak on. So if you wanted to know if you're how you doing at home or at work, all you do is go to my website, roxannedurhodge.com/quiz. You do a little quiz. You can do both. We'll analyze that and make some recommendations for you with some next steps. And if you'd like to have a coaching call with me just to check that out, please connect, and I would love to do that. Again, Mike, thanks so much for being here with us. And for everyone, we'll see you again next week. Take care.